I'd like to call the Newbury Township Planning Commission meeting November 14, 2022 to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, first item on the agenda, approval of the minutes from October 11th, 2022. Need a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Dale. Second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There's no old business. New business, the only thing I want to announce is if anybody's interested in becoming a member of the Planning Commission, put an application. You can go on the Newbury Township website or call the Township Hall and they can provide you details. So it's a new business. Okay, conditional use. We have one applicant, Cellco Partnerships, Verizon Wireless, be a cell tower, and come to the microphones. Please speak directly into the microphone and state your name and how you represent the applicant, please.
Good evening, James Strong. I'm an attorney with McNeese, Wallace & Nurek in Harrisburg, here on behalf of the applicant, Verizon Wireless. With me tonight are several folks. I guess we're the entire audience. Jim Rogers with Network Building and Consulting. He's the site acquisition consultant. Alec Fahey with Colliers Engineering and Design, and Brian Grebus with DBM Engineering. He's our radio frequency engineer. So as was mentioned, this is a proposal for a new communications tower facility. The facility is proposed for the property at 3000 Grandview Avenue. That property is owned by Jason Goodling. The property itself is over 10 acres. It's heavily wooded. It's already developed with an existing residential use and a repair shop. The facility itself, and you all have a copy of the plan, but the facility itself is fairly straightforward and typical of what you see at any other communications tower facility. It's a 153-foot tall monopole, so that's a singular tubular steel structure. It's not a lattice tower. And there's a 5-foot tall lightning rod that would be attached to the top of the tower. The tower and the equipment and other improvements would be located within a 40-foot by 40-foot fenced compound. And that fenced compound would include an 8-foot tall chain link fence with 1 foot of barbed wire at the top to keep people from getting into the facility that aren't authorized to be there. The equipment would be equipment cabinets. So unlike the older facilities where you'd have a large equipment shelter, these are actually outdoor equipment cabinets that are located on a concrete pad. And then there's also a generator for emergency power. In the event there's a power outage, the facility would be able to continue to operate, and subscribers would be able to continue to make calls in the event of emergency. Access would be from Grandview Avenue within a 20-foot wide access and utility easement. The property is located in the township's rural resource district, and communications tower facilities are permitted by conditional use in the rural resource district. So that's the application that was filed. It was a conditional use application requesting approval of the facility, and that hearing will be before the Board of Supervisors. The specific requirements for a communications tower facility are set forth in section 525.15 of the zoning ordinance, and the facility complies with all of those requirements except for one, and that's the 500-foot tower setback in section 525.15.3. The tower will be set back from all property lines a distance greater than the height of the tower. So the tower is 153 feet with a 5-foot lightning rod, so total structure height of 158 feet. The closest property line is 161 feet from the base of the tower. However, that section of the ordinance requires a 500-foot setback from the nearest property line of any adjoining property used for an existing residential use, and it's not possible to locate the tower on the property and comply with that 500-foot setback requirement. The zoning hearing board granted a variance from that section to permit the location of the tower on the property as proposed on the plan. The zoning hearing board also granted a second variance. That variance was from Section 508, and that's to permit more than one principal use on the property. Section 508 provides that more than one principal use is permitted on a single lot in the rural resource district, but only if the uses are located in the same building. And so here, our proposed use is a communications tower, which couldn't be located within the same building as the existing use on the property. So that variance was also granted by the zoning hearing board. We did submit a comprehensive narrative with the application that restated each of the ordinance requirements and how the proposed facility would comply with each of those requirements. And obviously, when we go to the hearing before the Board of Supervisors, we'll be presenting testimony and exhibits to demonstrate compliance with all of the requirements in the ordinance and create the record for the Board of Supervisors at the hearing. But for tonight, I wanted to provide you with an overview of what we were proposing, and then we have our team here to answer any questions that you might have regarding the application, and then we would request a favorable recommendation from the Planning Commission to the Board of Supervisors on the application. So with that, we'll look to you to, if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Well, I have a question. Why is the cell tower needed?
Due to, well, Brian, why don't you come up? What we do have are what a plot that shows what the existing coverage is in the area, and that will demonstrate why the tower is necessary. And then we also have a plot that shows what the coverage will be if the tower is approved, constructed, and on air. Brian, why don't you use the microphone?
And what's your last name, Brian?
My last name is Grebus, G-R-E-B as in Baker, I-S.
Okay.
So the map I'm showing before you is a map of the existing coverage here in the Goldsboro area. There's three colors you see on the map. There's the red, the yellow, and the green. These represent the levels of coverage that Verizon currently has today. The green represents areas where we have good in-building coverage, reliable coverage that can be met consistently in all types of weather, all seasons, and in all terrain. The yellow represents areas where we have in-car coverage of the same reliability, but that's a lower signal strength required for that because you're going through, I'm sorry.
Oh, Brian, could you point to the areas? Because
Oh, yes, sure.
So it may clear.
Apologize. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, if you could, thank you.
Thank you. So, and then I guess the one thing I forgot to mention was the black dots you see on the map are these around here are the existing sites. The one in the middle labeled YOR Golds, that is the site we're here for questions tonight. This site is not on there. These sites are on there, the Strinestown site and the Newberrytown site. They're both right along 83. There's other sites that are off to the east that you can't see. There's also one down to the southeast, Conewago. So these existing sites are on air and providing the coverage. As you can see, close to the site, it's green where we have a stronger signal. And then as you get away from the site, you fade into the yellow and red areas. As you can see around the site in question, we're pretty much all encompassed in yellow here, and we also have a good bit of red. There is a small patch of green here, but that's really because the terrain dips down and comes back up a little bit. But here within the site, there's a major thoroughfare. We have York Haven Road. We also have Old Susquehanna Trail and Cragmore Road. These areas are not being served so well. They're experiencing drop calls, slow data, that sort of thing. There's also several residential areas and recreational areas right around the site. So if we were to put a site here, it's going to greatly improve coverage, along the road so that people in cars can maintain calls, and reach 911 and so forth. And then as well as the surrounding residences will have better cell phone coverage as well. One thing to note is approximately 70% of all households only have a cell phone these days, so the requirement to have cellular coverage in a home is very important. So, and then I was just going to turn to the next one.
And this is what this is for 5G?
This is 4G, 5G, but this is all coverage. So the site will have 4G radios, 5G radios, and it'll do both for Verizon across pretty much all their frequency bands. So the next map before you shows what the coverage in the area will look like if we were to construct the site. As you can see, we've greatly filled in the green area, which is the strongest needed signal for in-building. We've also improved our in-street. We've narrowed, there's just that little bit of red there along 382, but for the most part along Cragmore, Old Susquehanna Trail, and the remainder of 382 York Haven Road, we have reliable coverage now. So this will facilitate data, phone calls, 911, emergency services, things of that nature to the users in the area.
And and what was the yellow represent?
The yellow represents reliable in-car. So the green is the strongest signal. Typically, it's about neg 76 dBm. That's a signal level that you need to penetrate the walls of a house or the exterior of a house. The in-car is generally about neg 84. That's what you need you only have to penetrate the glass. Although you're moving, you do have that to contend with, but it's mainly the glass in the cars that you have to worry about. And then the on-street, the red areas, that's when you're walking and you're not moving. So there's two advantages there. You can have a much weaker signal because you don't have the fading from the moving, and also there's no obstructions between you and the tower, really. So, because you're holding the phone and there's no glass, there's no walls or
They
anything.
might be just standing. And
Yeah.
you said the green represents
Reliable in-building coverage.
reliable in-building coverage. Okay.
Yes.
And you mentioned the wireless substitution.
Oh, can you use the mic, please?
You mentioned wireless substitution, how 70% of households now are wireless only. They don't have copper to the house. If you could just touch on E911 and why coverage is important from a 911 perspective.
Yes. So 911, approximately 70% for both. It's about 70% of all homes have 911 coverage, or I'm sorry, only have cell phones in a household, and approximately 70% of all 911 calls are made from cell phones. So if you multiply those two statistics together, you get approximately 50% of all 911 calls come from cell phones, which is why it's critical to have that coverage.
Was the red on there, excuse me, again, the red is not good, is that right?
That is correct. So you can use it outside, but in instances of being in a car or being in a house, it's not reliable. So sure. Are there any other questions?
So you mentioned it, different areas. So if we, as supervisor give their approval, so the benefits would be greater coverage. Okay.
Yes.
How about, is there any tax revenue coming in from Verizon for this?
Okay.
So the county will tax the tower facility, so there will be some tax revenue as a result of the assessment of the tower facility.
Is that PERTA? Public Utilities Realty Tax Act?
No, these facilities are not regulated by the Public Utility Commission. Verizon Wireless is not a public utility, so it's just they assess the value of the improvements and then it's taxed accordingly.
Oh, so the county assesses it, okay.
Correct.
For tax.
I have a quick question. I was curious as far as with you representing Verizon and this being a Verizon tower, when you're talking about the 50% coverage or 50% of 911 calls coming from cell phones, and you're talking about your coverage map, that's solely Verizon coverage, or is that any carrier coverage, what we're looking at on your diagram?
In this case, we're looking solely at Verizon's coverage. So, what the other carriers have in the area varies, but this is solely Verizon's coverage.
Okay, and and the tower moving forward will solely be Verizon as far as you know, or will there be I know there could be shared.
As a
Carriers on
monopole,
there.
I would think it would be open to co-location.
Yeah, so a couple things, great questions. The tower itself, once it's constructed, it's available to any other wireless provider. So AT&T, if they have a need in the area, there's a master lease agreement already in place between Verizon Wireless and AT&T Wireless. So they simply make an application and then they can go on the tower. So the tower is designed to accommodate not only Verizon Wireless's antennas and equipment, but also the antennas and equipment of other wireless providers, or, county emergency management. So it's not just built and designed for Verizon, it's built and designed to accommodate other providers as well. And then, Brian, maybe you can touch on, I think, although our plots are showing Verizon Wireless coverage, if there was an AT&T subscriber in the area who had to make a 911 call, maybe you could just touch on how that would be handled.
So 911 calls are universal. If your network doesn't have signal, it will roam and try and get on another network. That's an agreement between the various carriers. The only problem that arises there is sometimes when you buy a phone for Verizon, it's matched to Verizon's frequencies. If you buy a Galaxy or an iPhone, it might be specific to that carrier's frequencies, so you might have trouble hopping on another carrier's frequencies. But if they share a frequency, you can jump on their network to make the 911 call. So it improves the likelihood of making a 911 call. But again, it's best that everyone has the coverage in the area.
Am I correct, there will be a lease with the property owner?
Yes, that is correct.
Who will the lease be with? Who will be we'll say the tenant? We know who the landlord is, it's the property owner, so who will the tenant be, and how long will that lease be for?
The tenant will be the applicant, Cellco Partnership, DBA, Verizon Wireless. They are the tenant under the lease. And Jim, is it?
It's a 5-year
Oh, wait.
term with 4 5-year renewals.
And provide your.
I'm
name.
Jim Rogers. I'm the site acquisition consultant. It's a 5-year initial term with 4 5-year renewals.
But the first year is 5 years. You said, right? You said the first.
The first
The
term.
first term,
So the total possible term will be 25 years.
up to 25 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then what happens to the tower when the lease is all run out?
It has to be removed
By who?
by Verizon Wireless. Under the lease, they have an obligation to remove it within 90 days after the lease ends. And in addition to the lease obligation, there's also a township zoning ordinance requirement that requires that the tower be removed once it's no longer being used.
Yeah.
The antennas themselves, are they microwave? What kind of antennas? And the reason why I'm asking too is, I understand you're the gentleman we need to talk to as far as, is there any type of radio waves that neighbors, other people need to be concerned about with a cell tower, please?
Yes. So Verizon operates in frequencies that range from the more common frequencies are 600, 700 megahertz, all the way up to 3,700 megahertz. And then there's the newer. So that 3,700 is 5G NR. That's some of the lower frequency band for 5G. The higher frequency band gets up into like 60 gig, but I don't believe that's slated here. However, all those frequencies are licensed by the FCC, so we wouldn't be transmitting on any type of open channels for other types of radio systems, like two-way radio or public radio or shortwave or anything like that. We operate solely in the frequencies that Verizon has purchased from the FCC and is licensed to operate within that region. And assuming everyone stays in their frequency band and all of our equipment is type accepted and tested to make sure it's tuned properly, we won't interfere with anybody. As far as signal levels, we fall well within the maximal permissible exposure. So it's non-ionizing radiation, meaning there's no particles or anything. It's just radio energy. But it's by the time it gets to the ground, it's at a very low power. Typically, we don't see more than 10% of the maximum permissible exposure as slated by the FCC of all the bands combined. And those calculations are done assuming 100% transmission at full power, full time. The radio system actually scales back. It's always trying to transmit as little power as possible. It's trying to keep a low noise floor such that when we're all talking in the room, one person talks at a time, so everyone can hear. It's that kind of thing. They want to keep the interference down, so they keep the power level down as much as they can, still to maintain proper communications, but enough that everyone can use it effectively. So, you know, we fall well within the safety margins, and that's for 100% of the public. They take into account folks that be more sensitive to that sort of thing, as you know, as well as people that would be less sensitive. But they have to make it 100% non-occupational. So 100% public acceptable. Occupational limits are higher, so they use the lower public limits because it's not occupationally trained people.
All right, so in other words, I'm really stretching here, but people with pacemakers and stuff won't be coming in here saying, you allowed a cell tower, and that's affecting my pacemaker.
No, we won't interfere with that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you.
No problem, absolutely.
Yeah, Mr. Grievous, I know you gave an explanation, but can you give us, like, for example, like, the distance from a cell tower? Like, you figure it's 158 feet in the air, right?
Right.
Okay. What would it, to affect a person, how close would they have to be to the cell tower?
I mean,
Say they're standing there. What's the distance from the tower?
so if they're on the ground, there's nowhere that they can't be that's
Sure.
dangerous.
Right.
And when we take that calculation, so approximately an eighth to a quarter mile from the site, it depends on the antennas and how they're down tilted, is where the main beam hits the ground, and assuming 100% constructive interference from the radio waves that are reflecting off the ground at that point, it's, you know, that's where that highest, less than 10% of the maximum permissible exposure is. If you were to get in the danger zone, you would literally have to be in the air with your back against the antenna, so to speak, or within a few feet of it.
And I guess the weather would affect it also, like a sunny day, winter day, cloudy
Yes,
days?
yes. I
Would
mean,
that
but
affect it?
there's nowhere on the ground or that's publicly accessible that would be a danger to someone in the area, unless they were somehow hovering 150 feet in the air. And when, you know, the tower climbers go up to do maintenance or something like that, they shut radios down if they have to, depending on where they're going to be working, and they wear monitors to make sure they're not, you know, they're not exceeding the permissible exposure rate.
Right. Oh, Dave, you were asking about the, what happens with the tower. If you look at page 3 of the conditional use application narrative, it's in our ordinance 525.15. So it becomes functionally obsolete. The applicant shall remove the facility within 3 months from the date the applicant ceases use of the facility. So that's already covered in there. So that's good.
I have a question. Is there any permits required from the airport for this project?
It is required that we check with, there's two things, the PA Bureau of Aviation, and they gave us a green light. There's also, we check with something called TOWAIR to make sure we're not in any flight paths either. And we do both of those determinations, and they both came back that we wouldn't need to light the tower, and we would not be obstructing any local airports.
Note number 10 of the plans on page T1, it says, "No noise, smoke, dust, or odor will result from the facility or cause a nuisance." Now, this tower is going to have cooling fans and a transformer. How much, this is going to be running 24/7? What kind of noise will be coming from the tower?
Jim, is that, I'm not sure of a cooling fan or transformer.
There is no cooling fan.
No cooling fan?
No, the only noise that could possibly be generated by the site is if the generator goes on. The generators.
Come up this way, people, you know what it is, we're recording, this way people can see you. If
Uh,
they're, come to the podium, please.
The only noise that is going to be generated would be if the generator were on during an emergency situation. The generator's double walled; it meets all sound requirements. So there is no. That would be the only, and the what would happen if the power went out? There's a battery backup before the actual generator goes on, and hopefully the circumstances surrounding a massive power outage would be extremely infrequent. We're also in the middle of the woods, so we're quite a distance away from. I would contend that even if you were on the property at the residence, the owner's residence, it would be like an air conditioner, the sound of a window air conditioner from his house to, since the distance is so far from the tower itself.
Yeah, no, I saw it is wooded, and there are a few homes there on Grandview, that part of Grandview. Yeah, there are a few homes. So about the sound of an air conditioner,
Yes.
approximately? Okay.
Big air conditioner.
Yeah.
What what fuel does the generator use?
Diesel fuel, it's double walled, and it's 24-hour, it's monitored 24/7 to make sure that there's no leakages or anything like that.
That was where I was going to go with that, because if I understand the plans that, as I looked at them, you're going to have batteries on site, you're going to have a generator which has diesel fuel, or needs diesel fuel. So my concern is type of a hazard, okay, waste. I guess the best way to ask it is, how often is this site being fully automated? How often is this site inspected in case a battery blows, or you need new batteries, or there's a diesel fuel leak, or anything like this that may affect the land?
Everything is monitored 24/7. So with the double wall, the generator's always monitored. But in terms of actually someone physically coming to the site, there's a cell tech that typically comes out 4 to 6 weeks. I think it goes a little longer than that now, ever since COVID. They can do so much remotely in terms of diagnostics and on the equipment that I think the timeframes are a little bit longer, maybe 8 weeks. But that being said, everything is monitored 24/7.
And, okay, that's appreciated, thank you for that answer. What the batteries themselves, are they lead-acid batteries?
That I
can
don't
leak?
know. I don't know what the, I've never heard of a battery leaking or anything. I mean, I've been in this business for 25 years, and I've just
You've
never
never
heard
heard of a car battery leaking?
Well, I've never heard one at a cell site leaking. So, I mean, when they're out there, if the battery is failing, they would know that from a diagnostic standpoint. So I'm not anticipating that ever to be a problem. They would replace that before it would ever get to that state.
I have a home generator at home. I know this is much more robust than my home generator. But in any case, I've had problems lately, I've been online looking at it, and they've showed me through YouTube how batteries have exploded inside the generator.
Well,
So I'm just wondering how.
there's not a
this is
battery
covered.
in the generator. The battery pack is in one of the cabinets for backup. It's not near the generator, so it's not adjacent to it. So it's contained in a metal cabinet, so even if it exploded, I don't think it would affect the generator one way or the other.
My concern's not the generator as much as it is the explosion, okay? And the sulfuric acid coming out and getting on other things. So, first of all, do me a favor and tell me what the batteries are used for, but then I'm still concerned about that. I don't know
The battery is only used if the power goes out, and it's only a temporary, it's used, I think the battery backup lasts, 12 hours or something. Typically, it'll switch over to the generator pretty quickly. They won't even use the battery.
So it's UPS purposes.
Yes, it's only for like a temporary fill until the generator goes on, so that we're not going completely down at the site.
All right, and again, I'm sorry, you can tell it's a concern of mine. I worked for a big establishment that had 24, 25 batteries as a UPS backup, okay, for their computer system. And believe it or not, they leaked, okay? And that was a UPS sitting in a cabinet all by themselves, and it leaked. And it gave off sulfuric acid to the point we had to open all the doors. And I believe at the time, I don't remember this for sure, but I don't know if we had to call for help, fire company or something like that, because of fumes and everything. Now, I understand this is outside. I'm just stating that I have a concern for that.
Duly noted. I can tell you I've been in this business actually 26 years. I've never heard of an issue with the battery leaking or a problem. And I'm sure I would have heard it if there had been a problem.
In a cell tower,
Yes,
that's what you're talking
yes.
about. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
You know, on page one, conditional use application, 525.15, it says, at the hearing, Verizon Wireless will present testimony supporting documentation from a radio frequency design engineer demonstrating the proposed location necessary for the efficient operation of the system. Well, what if you lived on Grandview Avenue? Now, you're talking about the efficient operating system. How about the people that are actually going to live near this cell phone tower? What are the, like, what's the negatives? Like, if you live there, what would be the, you know, talk about the positive, you're gonna have increased coverage. But what if you live there and you're hearing this thing every day, 24/7? What are some of the negatives?
That's an interesting question. The ordinance requirement in 525.15.1 requires that the applicant demonstrate what we demonstrated for you tonight, which is there's an existing gap in coverage that this site is needed to fill that for the overall system. You know, to address your question, different people will have different opinions. I live on a property that, in the rear, I have a PPL transmission tower. So it's there, I know it's there.
Right.
It doesn't affect me. And I could see two other cell towers from my property. So here, this property is wooded. I don't know that it will even be very visible from any of the adjacent properties. So I don't think visibility is much of an issue with this. With respect to noise, if the generator comes on, I've got static here, but if the generator comes on, it's only going to sound like an air conditioning unit comes on. I would submit that someone mowing their lawn is going to generate more noise than this tower facility will ever generate. When you talk
But they're not
about,
mowing for 24/7,
well,
just that short time.
the generator would be on for that period of time as if there's a power outage that's lasting for that period of time.
Right.
So if the power goes out for 3 hours, it would run for 3 hours. But, you know, it's not going to be running all the time. In terms of vehicle trips, I mean, that's generate traffic. Here, once the site's built, as Mr. Rogers spoke to, a maintenance technician will be out once every 6 to 8 weeks. They're typically in a sport utility vehicle or a light truck to visit the site, look it over, make sure everything is operating correctly. So in terms of traffic trips, you're talking about one vehicle every 6 to 8 weeks. Once the site is there, most people, they blend into the background, don't really notice them. But again, everyone thinks differently about things, but in my experience, once they're there, people usually don't notice them. The tower will not be lit. Sometimes that's a concern. If there's a red light or a flashing light at the top of the tower, that's much more noticeable. Here, lighting of the tower is not required by either the FAA or the PennDOT Bureau of Aviation. So in the absence of a requirement, Verizon Wireless does not voluntarily light the tower, so the tower will not be lit. So in my opinion, I don't think there's going to be much impact at all for folks in the immediate area or in the larger vicinity. Hold it up here? Okay.
Yeah, okay.
User error.
How about the base? What kind of material is it made from, the base, the 40-foot by 40-foot base?
Well, the 40-foot by 40-foot is the fenced area, and so then there will be gravel located within that fenced area.
So not concrete?
Correct. There will be concrete slabs that the equipment will sit on and that the generator would sit on, but those are 4-foot by 11-foot for the equipment cabinets and 4 foot by 7 feet for the generator. So You have 2 concrete pads for those improvements. The rest would just be gravel within the 40-foot by 40-foot fenced area.
Will there be some sort of a street light on that though too, on the area? I know you said not a light, but you're talking about one at the very top of the tower, correct?
Correct, yeah, that's what I was referring
That's
to.
not required, that's what, I'm just wondering, will there be another smaller light that lights up? When I go to Fairview Township and I see their electrical fenced-in area, they have a light on all the time. Okay, is this the same thing or not?
No, what they typically, Alec, I don't think there's any light on any of these facilities now. We used to do, on the shelter, there used to be a light above the door.
Yeah, so-
And then, but it would only turn on when the technician was there. So if there is a light to light up the cabinet area, it would only go on, it wouldn't be on 24/7. It would only go on when the technician was there.
It's dark.
Yes, typically what, the technicians are usually there during Monday through, Friday during regular business hours. And if there is an absolute emergency where something's gone down, I mean, they're not going to be able to get a crew out there in the middle of the night. More than likely, it's going to be during the regular business hours.
I'll bet AT&T will.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that.
I'm just kidding.
Oh, Mr. Strong, on page 6 of the application, third paragraph, finally proposed facility will not substantially impair the integrity of the comprehensive plan. And then you cited some plans, some court cases like Northampton Area School District. They requested a conditional use to permit construction of a new high school. Abbey versus East Stroudsburg Zoning Board. It was, they want to generate a waste energy recycling facility. Warren City Probation Association, they want to put in a single-family group home, which has really nothing to do, I was trying to make the argument, conditional use, and I gave you examples. But how come you didn't have any examples of where conditional use was not upheld by the courts? Either Commonwealth Court or Supreme Court?
Sure. So the cases that are cited there in the discussion generally is about conditional use applications.
Right.
And just to make it, clear how they are to be reviewed. And so, generally speaking, a conditional use application that satisfies the stated objective criteria in the zoning ordinance must be approved. And there's a heavy burden on anyone that's opposing that application. And so they have to present, evidence that the use will have some impact not normally associated with that type of use. So that really is what those 2 paragraphs in the narrative are touching on, is just generally how conditional use applications are to be reviewed. So it wasn't to get into the factual background of each of those cases, but more just the general legal concepts about how a conditional use application should be reviewed.
But were there any conditional uses that were not approved by a board?
A conditional use application for a cell tower facility?
Actually, any, since you use different cases, you didn't mention any cell towers in here. There was a group home, it was a high school.
Right, yeah, all of those cases were they were cases that were representative of those principles of law for how a conditional use application should be reviewed.
But you didn't answer my question.
Are there conditional uses
No, my
for a cell?
question is, were there, somebody's going for a conditional use before a zoning board or planning commission, right? They get turned down. Like these were all approved. So what happened? How come you didn't cite those examples where something was turned down? Or were there how many years you been an attorney? Just wondering.
This is an allowable use.
Yeah, I've been
Yeah.
practicing for 24 years.
Okay.
I'm not sure what the relevance of that is,
Well,
but, we can certainly have an extended dialogue about conditional use applications and what the law is with, to be applied to them. Again, these cases are not cited for the facts of the case, but that they are supportive
Just
of.
examples, okay.
Right, of how a conditional use application is to be reviewed.
I'll just add in here, you have my November 9th memo. As was stated, it is a conditional use, so it gives you the opportunity to add conditions to your recommended approval. I would just, if you act positively on this tonight, that, you could mention that, it would be, recommending approval based on meeting the conditions in my memo. This is kind of the second step. He mentioned that there was a zoning variance already approved. This is the conditional use application. And then at some point, it's going to come in for land development. We're going to look at it for things like stormwater and whatnot, and the access and all those good things that we normally look at, so.
Was there anything else you had to add to that, Bill, or that was pretty much it in your,
No,
okay.
that's pretty much it. You have the memo. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah, I think it was mentioned earlier, but it will be on the board, the same night as the board meeting, an hour before is the actual conditional use hearing.
At the supervisor,
Correct, next Tuesday,
okay. All right.
5 o'clock.
I'm just curious.
Guess you get to reschedule that one.
I'm just curious because it's here. 525.15.5, which is page 2. If the site is agriculture or RR districts, the applicant shall demonstrate the proposed location is located on the least protective soil. How do you determine that, and how do you know that's the case?
The county has a soils map, and so you go by the county map, and there's a note on the plan that talks about what the soil classification is for the soils on site, and that's taken from the York County Soils Classification Map. I believe it's Class 7.
So it's a big general area. It's not just that the tower's going on this 40-foot by 40-foot slab. So we're not talking about a 40-foot by 40-foot slab. We're talking about the whole parcel. Is that
Generally speaking, Alec, is the soils uniform across the property? I mean, I think where our improvements are located is really all that matters, but
Hi, Alec Fahey with Colliers Engineering. Generally, yeah, it's a much broader area for those classifications. I believe there was only one classification on the entire parcel.
Did you get his name, Jim?
I think the only thing that grows around here is houses.
Oh, you got his name.
I do want to say thank you, and I want to say thank you. I appreciated the fact that this is also open to other carriers if they so desire. That way, we don't need another cell tower 300 feet away because AT&T wants to put one on. I appreciate that, okay? But with that in mind, you did mention this, somebody did, it's designed to accommodate the maximum load of carriers and equipment. What does that mean?
Generally speaking, we don't know what all the other carriers' equipment's going to be, what they're going to be proposing to put on the pole, but generally speaking, the tower is designed to hold up to 4 racks of antennas. So I would conceive that AT&T and T-Mobile would be able to get on this tower with the way we're going to design it structurally, that they should be able to be accommodated on the tower without any issue. And if there is an issue, the tower can be upgraded to be strengthened. They can do different things to increase the foundation or strengthen the tower, make it more rigid if we need to upgrade the tower in order to accommodate the users. So, but the way it's designed is to handle 4 racks of antennas.
Thank you. I have one last one, then I'll let everybody else. At the end, at the very last page, okay, it says something about extending the time frame. Conclusion, Verizon Wireless respectfully requests the board grant the requested conditional use and extension of timeframes. Why is that request there? What's wrong with the 6 months and 12 months?
So generally speaking, we'll request that extension because this isn't the only approval that's necessary for the site. It also goes through regulatory approvals, the State Historic Preservation Officer. They're federal level regulatory reviews. As was mentioned, if a land development plan is required, that can be a 2, 3, 4-month process. So there are a lot of different things that can factor into how quickly we could pull a permit and build the site. So it's easier to ask for it now and not need it than to have to come back into you 5 months from now and say, hey, we're still working on our approvals. Can you give us a 6-month extension? So we like to ask for it when we're going through the process.
All right, and I can understand that, and that makes sense. But then the second part of that is the 6 month to 12 months to have it completed, and you said we may not get it done in a year, it may take 2 years to complete it. Well, why all of a sudden 2 years to complete this? It doesn't, to me, doesn't sound like it's gonna take much.
Yeah, so, a couple things. One is Verizon Wireless will have a capital budget every year for, how many sites they can build. And so there's only so much money, and so they have to decide which sites they're going to build. COVID is another great example. That turned everything upside down in terms of materials, construction timeframes, everything else. So there are always, some factors that are known, some factors that are unknown that can lead to delays in building the site. I mean, ideally, a land development plan isn't required, it's a permit only, and we can build the thing, fairly quickly and get it on air, and it's not even a consideration. But again, when we're going through the approval process, it's better to ask for it now so that we have a little bit of breathing room in case there's anything that comes up during that regulatory review and approval process. So that's the reason for both the 6 month and the 12 month.
I can just assure you that Verizon has every intention to build this as quickly as possible, provided that we can get through all the processes that we have to go through. I will mention that this is considered what we call a root metric site. These are high priority sites that Verizon has targeted because this is a high complaint area for terrible service. So this is a very high priority for Verizon to get this done.
If I can make a comment, as a Verizon customer, I really wish you'd address the areas in the pink because reception at my property is horrible.
To the north,
To the north.
and that may require another site. The problem when you get up to the north is you move out of areas where the township allows towers, I believe up in that area. So, yeah, there's more work to be done there for sure.
There's not, the actual area that we wanted to be in was on the north side of 382. But everything would require a use variance because it's all residential holding or R1 zoning, if I remember correctly. It wasn't possible. There is a very limited areas that we can locate a tower in the township. And this is one of the few areas that actually made sense because it was high on a hill and we could get a lot of bang for our buck where we're locating. But it's not going to address everything in the township.
What's the estimated lifespan of a tower?
I mean, we have towers that have been up for 35, 40 years. I mean, they're regularly maintained. They're, galvanized steel, so they don't rust. So they should last for a very long time. I mean, they're certainly going to last a lot longer than we'll probably all be alive, so.
Okay.
To follow that up, as far as I know you have in here that there's going to be a decommissioning plan set forth. What sort of contingency does Verizon or even other carriers, as far as that goes, like when you say the tower might last longer than we're alive, say the lease keeps getting extended, say the tower's there 40 years from now, Verizon has changed hands, is there some kind of fund in general to decommission them at that point? Or is it solely on things the status quo staying the same with Verizon and the agreement, all these agreements? Is there any loophole where no one's there to decommission the tower because of financial failure or something else?
If the tower gets sold, like to a tower company, they're still obligated under the agreement to comply with what's in the agreement as well as the ordinance here in the township. So it wouldn't matter who owned the tower. Also, there's whoever owns the tower is obligated to continually maintain and inspect it. And that's an ongoing thing that Verizon does to make sure that the tower is safe and operating correctly.
Okay, because I'm thinking, from the past, abandoned gas wells and all the things that we see from previous industry. Well, if technology changes 40 years from now, maybe this is, entirely not even used anymore. Just that there's something there that we don't just wind up with abandoned towers that there's no funds to take down. As long as all that's covered in some manner.
Yeah, and again, really, the two hooks there are the lease with the property owner, which requires the removal, and then the township zoning ordinance, which requires the removal. But those are the two sources of guaranteeing removal.
Was anybody have any additional? No other questions? Yeah, I can. Push the button, Jeff.
I move that we approve the conditional,
Recommend.
I recommend that we approve the conditional use of, for the cell tower from Verizon, contingent upon the township engineer's comments.
I'll second it.
Okay, the motion's been on the floor and seconded. Any other further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Say aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
Okay, motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Second? All in favor? Aye. Opposed?